Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Know-It-All, and I'll be your guide for today's analysis of the Chinese tech giant Huawei, seen as a phoenix reborn from U.S. sanctions. Let's go back to the milestone of May 2019 when the entire tech world held its breath as one of the industry's giants, Huawei, was placed on the U.S. government's blacklist. This embargo cut Huawei off from core American technologies, from Google's Android operating system to advanced semiconductor chips. Many believed that this was the end of the Chinese corporation's global ambitions. Yet, 5 years later, Huawei has not only avoided collapse, but has risen stronger than ever, reclaiming the number one spot in its home smartphone market and reporting soaring profits. Huawei's story is not just a classic lesson in crisis management, it is also the clearest lens through which we can view the fierce trade and technology war between the two superpowers, the US and China. Today, we will analyze how Huawei weathered the storm, the impact of this war on tech companies, and ultimately, who will bear the heavier consequences in this geopolitical chess game. Huawei's 5 years of weathering the storm. To understand how Huawei survived, we first need to know why it became a target. The US government cited several reasons, from allegations of close ties to the Chinese government, national security espionage risks, and violations of Iran's sanctions, to a deeper fear that Huawei would dominate global 5G technology, the backbone of the future digital economy. When the ban was enacted, it was a devastating blow. Huawei's international smartphone business nearly collapsed overnight as it lost access to Google services. Its global component supply chain was shattered. Revenues plummeted. The crisis was real and extremely severe. Facing a situation where it was hanging by a thread, Huawei took extraordinary strategic steps. First, technological self-reliance. Instead of succumbing to the loss of Android, they poured billions of dollars into research and development, R&D, to create their own operating system, Harmony OS. Simultaneously, they designed their own Kirin chips and turned the domestic manufacturers like SMIC to escape dependency on American technology. Second, a market pivot and business diversification. As the international door closed, Huawei focused all its efforts on the massive domestic market of 1.4 billion people. At the same time, they evolved beyond being just a phone company. They expanded into other lucrative fields such as cloud services, smart wearables, and especially solutions for smart cars, collaborating with many domestic auto brands. Third, turning challenges into motivation. The US ban inadvertently became a powerful call for national pride in China. Domestic customers supported Huawei as a symbol of national self-strengthening. And what was the result? In the first half of 2024, Huawei reported impressive growth in revenue and profit, reclaiming the top spot in the Chinese smartphone market. They proved that even the harshest sanctions could not kill a corporation with enough determination, resources, and support from its home market. The impact of the U.S. China war and who suffers. Huawei's story is a microcosm of the U.S. China tech war. This war doesn't just affect one company, it is reshaping the entire global technology industry. First, for Chinese tech companies, initially they were the ones who suffered direct losses, but the pressure from the US forced them to accelerate their process of self-reliance and self-strengthening. China is now concentrating its efforts on building an independent technology ecosystem, from chip design and manufacturing to operating systems. In the long run, this could create a formidable competitor that the US cannot control with sanctions. Second, for American tech companies, though they might have seemed like the winners, US companies like Google, Qualcomm, and Intel also suffered heavy losses. They lost a huge customer in Huawei. revenue from the Chinese market declined, and more importantly, their dominant position in the global supply chain is now being challenged. Third, for the rest of the world, global tech companies are caught in the middle. They face a highly uncertain business environment, forced to choose sides or negatives between two increasingly separated technological systems. So, who will suffer the heavier consequences? The answer is not simple. In the short term, Huawei and other Chinese companies paid a very high price, but in the long term, the picture is much more complex. The US risks losing its technological supremacy. By trying to contain China, the US may have inadvertently pushed its rival to become more independent and powerful. The loss of the Chinese market and the disruption of the global supply chain also harm the US economy itself. Finally, global consumers are also among the losers. We are facing the risk of a technological iron curtain, or a splinter net, a fragmented world of internet and technology. Instead of an open, innovative, and connected ecosystem, we may have two competing, less compatible systems, leading to higher prices and fewer choices. Political analyst Bruce Hellman argues that the United States cannot underestimate China's ambition to dominate the tech sector by 2025. When the US began to ban Chinese companies, Huawei advised many of its suppliers to soon shift their product lines to China. Even companies like Tesla decided to build a car manufacturing plant in Shanghai to avoid the economic sanctions imposed by President Trump on Beijing. The US not only suffered losses as manufacturing companies moved their factories to China, but it was also significantly impacted as the flow of investment into its tech sectors severely declined. According to sources cited by the Sierra Leone Times, a consequence of the US ban on Chinese companies is the slowing of the steady flow of Chinese investment into American tech firms. In 2018, the investment flow from China into the US tech companies was over $2 billion. However, according to Forbes, this figure represented a drop of more than 80% compared to 2017. If bilateral trade negotiations between the US and China continue to yield no positive results, the amount of investment flowing into the US will decrease even further. However, Dean Garfield, head of the IT Industry Council, a Washington, D.C. based trade association representing global US tech companies, believes that a brighter prospect for the two countries' tech firms still remains. He argues that both the US and China still need each other in technology race. While the US depends largely on China's advantage in large-scale electronics manufacturing, China, in turn, depends heavily on America's core technology and chips. The trade war will certainly hurt Chinese tech companies, but will also have a negative impact on major US tech firms. The most obvious example is the case of Apple. The trillion-dollar company surprisingly stumbled in Q4 2018 after lowering its revenue forecast. Apple blamed the slowdown in the Chinese economy, declining demand for new iPhones, and the U.S. China trade war. Indeed, in the Q4 2018 revenue report released by Apple in late January 2019, the company highlighted that its revenue in Greater China had fallen by as much as 27%. 2025. Tech companies brace for a new wave of tariffs following Donald Trump's re-election. In early 2025, Chinese technology companies, symbolized by Huawei, find themselves in a complex position. On one hand, they have demonstrated remarkable resilience and strength after years of sanctions. On the other hand, they face the risk of a new, more intense trade war as Donald Trump is re-elected and acts on his threats to raise tariffs. Despite its success in the domestic market with the Harmony OS, in a spectacular comeback in China's high-end smartphone market, Huawei still faces a massive bottleneck in the mass production of advanced AI chips. New sanctions from the US and its allies, such as Taiwan, placing Huawei on its export control list in June 2025, continue to choke off its access to source technologies. Founder Ren Zhengfei has also publicly admitted that Huawei still lags behind the US in the field of AI hardware. Other giants, BYD, Xiaomi, Tencent, Alibaba, BYD, and electric vehicles. BYD has surpassed Tesla to become the world's largest manufacturer of electronic vehicles, showcasing China's dominance in the battery and EV supply chain. Xiaomi and Oppo. These companies have been actively expanding into emerging markets like Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East to reduce their dependency on Western markets. Tencent and Alibaba. Despite facing stricter oversight from their domestic government, these companies remain formidable forces in gaming, cloud computing, and e-commerce, while also ramping up investment in AI and semiconductors. Despite their achievements, however, Chinese tech companies mostly constantly confront challenges from the US following Mr. Trump's re-election. President Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to impose a universal tariff, possibly 10% on all imports, and a much heavier tariff, potentially up to 60% or more on goods from China. The goal is not only to reduce the trade deficit, but also to punish what are perceived as unfair trade practices and to curb China's technological rise. A new round of tariffs would immediately increase the price of consumer electronics like phones and laptops, of which 70 to 80% of US imports come from China, harming both American consumers and Chinese manufacturers. Clearly, the position of Huawei and other Chinese tech companies in early 2025 is one of stark contrast. They are stronger, more self-reliant, and better prepared than they were in 2018. However, a new, all-out trade war with record-high tariffs would be an ultimate test of their endurance. This confrontation is no longer merely about tariffs. It has become a race in technology and supply chains. Its outcome will not only reshape China's tech industry, but also the entire global trade structure for years to come. Ladies and gentlemen, Huawei's story of overcoming US sanctions is an inspiring testament to resilience and adaptability. But looking at the bigger picture, it reveals a worrying truth. The US China trade war is pulling the world into a new era of technological confrontation. There are no absolute winners in this war. Huawei's rise from the crisis shows that using sanctions to stifle a rival can backfire, creating an even stronger competitor. Meanwhile, the fragmentation of the global technology ecosystem will be a collective loss for everyone, from multinational corporations to individual consumers. Huawei's story, therefore, is not just a business lesson, it is a warning about the future of a world divided by geopolitics, where the global cooperation that once drove progress is now giving way to competition and confrontation. If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to get the latest notifications from Mr. Know-It-All. For now, goodbye and see you again.